What Professor Craig does brilliantly and with a wonderful enthusiasm is he takes our everyday intuitions, our gut feelings about what's plausible, what's counterintuitive, what couldn't possibly be true, and he cantilevers them out into territory where they've never been tested in cosmology, where whatever the truth is, it's mind-boggling. So we know in advance that whatever the truth is, it's going to be jaw-droppingly implausible and counterintuitive in one way or another. The simplest expression of this, I think, was due to the late Philip Morrison, who pointed out, perhaps we are alone in the universe. Perhaps there's no other planet in the whole universe that has intelligent life on it. Or perhaps that's not true. Both alternatives are mind-boggling. The hypothesis that we're alone is mind-boggling. The hypothesis that we're not alone is mind-boggling. So you can't use mind-bogglingness as your litmus test. The truth is going to be very hard to believe. And some of our home truths are going to have to be abandoned. We already know this from quantum physics. We already know this from Einstein. How do we get the leverage to find the epistemic sort of leverage to dislodge something that just seems so crashingly obvious we're prepared to use it as a premise? It takes a huge scientific structure with complex mathematical arguments and a sort of delicious conspiracy of confirmatory evidence, and finally people shake their heads and say, okay, however counterintuitive this is, we're going to have to accept it. That's the situation in quantum mechanics, as Richard Feynman, the late great physicist, said. And he was as arrogant a scientist as there ever was. He had a black belt in overconfidence. And he says, I don't understand quantum mechanics. Nobody understands quantum mechanics. Maybe nobody can. In those circumstances, you come to trust the mathematical theory that you can't interpret yet. Raging battles over how to interpret quantum mechanics. Unsettled. But, as Feynman points out, the mathematical structure, which is just in some sense a black box that we can't yet get to the bottom of, it predicts results of such breathtaking accuracy. His comparison, I won't get it exactly right, but I think it's like being able to measure the distance between San Francisco and Miami to a hair's breadth. Breathtakingly accurate predictions. Those are the sorts of just the weight of evidence that can overturn everyday intuitions that you just think, that couldn't possibly be false. But it turns out to be false. And what Professor Craig has shown us is how the arguments go, and how, if you start with a bunch of initially very plausible premises, and in each case he says, look, this is a very plausible premise. I don't see how this could be false. This just stands to reason. And then you pursue it, and he does that. As near as I could see, I had no quarrels with the relentless development he puts on those premises. But we end up at really remarkably implausible conclusions. Now, Officially, of course, if you end up with a self-contradictory conclusion, you've got a reductio ad absurdum argument and something has to give. I cannot pin a formal reductio on anything. At least if I can't do it impromptu. There was an awful lot going on in that talk. But I can point to some areas of suspicion. First, I want to address one of the points that came up late. Maybe I'll just make that point and then that will be enough. Let us suppose, for the sake of argument, that the cosmological argument, one of the cosmological arguments that he presents, does favor the conclusion that the cause of the universe is a timeless, changeless, abstract, immaterial, whatever. At that point, we have no idea what that might be. But whatever it is, it's the cause of the universe. Maybe it's the idea of an apple. Maybe it's the square root of 7. But no, he says, it's nothing like that because abstract things can't cause things. Who says? Who says abstract things can't cause things? My favorite example of an abstract thing causing things is the principle of triangulation, so that when you want to keep your house from going like this, you put a triangular piece on and you tack it down, and then thanks to the rigidity of triangles, you create a rigid structure. It seems causal. It's quite wonderful, the effect of tacking that extra piece on and making the triangle, and now we've got a rigid figure. It's Euclidean geometry, an abstract principle being invoked in a causal way. But you say, well, that's not really causation. Okay, it's something like causation. And of course, we've already heard from Professor Craig, it's not really like causation when God causes the universe, because it's not it's not physical causation. Well, what do we know about non-physical causation? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. So we're really just guessing at what non-physical causation could be. Our intuitions just don't carry us into that area. Now, contemporary cosmology is a fascinating area, and I must say it completely twists my head up, and I have no confidence about anything in that area. I'm delighted that Professor Craig mentioned my colleague Alex Valenkin, who is one smart dude. And I wish I could get to the bottom of all of the stuff that Alex does. I wish Alex were here to respond, because I know that Alex and Alan Guth and some of these other people would have an awful lot to say. Unfortunately, it would be highly technical. And I don't think I would understand it, and I don't think most of you would understand it, but they, first of all, they wouldn't agree. Contemporary cosmology is in a wonderful snarl. And those of us who are not mathematicians and physicists are going to have to sit on the sidelines and wait for something to percolate out of this. The intrepidness with which Professor Craig leaps in there and chooses sides is a wonderful thing. I just don't have his courage on that point. But back to the question of this changeless God. The trouble with a changeless God is that it is changeless. It is outside of time. Don't bother praying to it, or certainly don't expect it in time to hear your prayer and answer your prayer. A changeless God is a deist God at best. So that's why I don't think that most people in the world who believe in God need take anything more than the most passing curiosity, interest in the battle of cosmology, because it doesn't really reflect a response to their curiosity at all. Now, Professor Craig says that he's got some arguments that this is a personal God. And one of the premises is there's two kinds of causation: scientific causation and personal causation. I submit that that's just false. That's as good as my life work to show how personal causation reduces to scientific causation. So that's where I would drive the wedge in there. But that's a long story. Thanks very much.